Hi, this is Chicken Fried, and today I'll be talking through a quick history of aggro decks in GLC and the influence on them today. Aggro, short for aggressive, is typically coined for fast decks that focus on the early game and overtake the opponent with early pressure. Here we have Google Gemini's definition. You may be wondering why we've got boss on screen, and through the video we'll be talking through about what the boss has ordered and how it relates to aggro decks. So starting off with a little history, even in the beginning of the Pokemon TCG, aggro decks have existed. For example, we had Haymaker with the Hitmonchan attack, Haymaker. And since the inception of GLC, aggressive decks have also existed. Albeit unrefined, types like Lightning and Dark became well known for being aggressive types. Lightning had Zapdos and Dark had Hoopa, which provided strong options to donk the opponent turn 1 by hitting for 90 and 80. However, for players back then, you may be familiar with the downside of requiring Zapdos and Hoopa to pivot. This led to aggressive decks heavily leaning on switch effects to continue their game plan. In addition, these types had two prize options to come back, should the deck fall behind. Both Amazing Raikou and Guzzlord provided oppressive options by taking two prizes immediately. Here are some example deck lists from back in the day. In 2022, Amazing Raikou was one of the top decks in the meta. You had Zapdos, as mentioned, and Raikou. And some key cards I want to call out are you have the free retreat from Tapu Koko, but you also played cards like Tate and Liza, Switch, Escape Rope, and Scoop Up Net to make sure you could keep attacking with your Zapdos. Another relic of GLC I want to call out was Bridget, which is rarely seen in the current pace of GLC decks. Meanwhile, right here we got Turbo Dark from 2023, and you have the Hoopa and Guzzlord. This deck also played Alola Meowth. Another option to use the attack as it suggests spoil the fun and potentially donk the opponent. You may also see some switching options in this deck too, like Tate and Liza and Escape Rope. So what happened to these decks? Amazing Raikou got banned with the release of Magneton and Joltik. Meanwhile, Dark fell out of favor due to the inability to catch up to the speed of the current decks. So, starting now with the rise of Drago Box. In 2024, Drago Box, which was a dragon deck focused solely on big basics. I think what's different about this deck is that this is an aggro deck with no way to obtain multiple prizes in a turn. You aim to overrun your opponent through an onslaught of attacks. This proved very possible with the bench sniping from Raging Bolt and Gust from Guzma in Boss's orders. I find it very interesting how this led to a blueprint that we'll see in aggro decks in the present. Players understood the importance of Gust, but being able to have multiple options of it in a singleton format was very effective. Next, we have Turbo Colorless from Journey Together 1K before the DCE ban. The release of Fan Rotom gave Colorless the ability to take a turn 1 knockout similar to Hoopa and Zapdos, and for Drago Box's Raging Bolt. Similarly, we see heavy use of Gust in the inclusion of Reset Stamp, another key card we'll see going forward in aggro decks. Ben Morse piloted his deck to a first place at the 1K. Following up, we had the Mega 3K, where Fighting saw the release of the Rocks, which was their equivalent of Fan Rotom in Soul Rock. We can see here the same concept of heavy gusts along with Reset Stamp Hex being played here too. This deck, now commonly dubbed RDT for Rocks, Dog, and Ting Lu, was piloted by Chris Hill, also known as Ghouls, that we'll see later, to a first at the 3K. This deck took GLC by storm with its consistency to take early prizes and take multiple KOs with Okidogi. This also marked the dominance of fighting in GLC. I also wanted to give a shout out to Low Tide Water, piloted by Austin Bierman at the Phantasmal Flames 3K, where he finished second. Water is slightly unique given the ability to tutor for any trainer with Drizzle and Teleon, so for this deck, it also mainly focused on stage 1s, as Water does not have strong low energy basic attackers. Overall, this deck is quite different from the other aggro decks, and is less played today due to the fact that you have to evolve into stage 1s to put pressure. However, I just wanted to put it out because I think it's very interesting, another take on aggro with the water type. So, what does aggro look like today? So, for some common themes I wanted to talk through on what aggro decks today have is they have the ability to target the bench. We've talked about the decision to play gust effects in decks. Typically, aggro decks want to eliminate evolving Pokemon before the threat has too much HP or has time to apply a devastating ability, and as such, being able to target the bench is important. Next is having big basics and the ability to attack starting turn 1. Being able to attack starting turn 1 is very important for these kinds of decks as they're unable to take multiple prizes. The decks so far we've seen only can take 1 prize per turn. This means each game requires a minimum of 6 turns to take 6 prizes, and if you're able to take a knockout on your first turn, the clock has begun ticking. Another addition is Lost City. Lost City is helpful as aggro decks want to take advantage of the ability to take early knockouts. An early knockout on a key evolving basic can be backbreaking for many decks and forces decks to build more honestly, where they have redundancy in the deck. Lastly, I want to talk about how Reset Stamp plus Hex is used as a comeback mechanic. As mentioned earlier, you do not have a way to take multiple prizes in a turn. So aggro decks plan to disrupt the opponent with Reset Stamp and use Hex to shut off the abilities. And all it takes is 1 turn for your opponent to falter for you to flip the prize race. Furthermore, about targeting the bench, I think aggro decks have what I call the trifecta. As an aggro deck, there's Boss's Orders and Guzma to provide Gust. It is a supporter, and then in addition, you got Fighting and Colorless with Hariyama and Double to Gust on an ability, while Dragon has Raging Bolt, which can directly attack the bench. As discussed, these are extremely strong effects in aggro decks, especially when played in combination with Lost City. Starting with the example deck list from the most recent Pitch Black 3K, we have Olivier's RDT list where he finished top 4. We see the trifecta right here, and then we also see Soul Rock as mentioned for the turn 1 pressure, Lost City, Stamp, and Hex. And so these key elements that we've talked about are here, and these are kind of improvements that we've seen from the original RDT list that we had shown from Chris Hill that won the Mega 3K. Moving along, we also have Jesse Parker's winning list for the Pitch Black 3K. We have, similarly, the trifecta. We got Fan Rotom, Lost City, and then Stamp and Hex. And so this has another take on the Turbo Colorless that we saw earlier that Ben Morse piloted. Granted, now Colorless no longer has access to those double Colorless energies, but it was able to provide this aggressive strategy through these cards I've listed here in that aggro formula and seen success, ultimately winning the 3K. And then lastly, I wanted to bring up this Drago box deck that has been updated by Ghouls for the TBZ Invitational. It only has Guzma and Raging Bolt, and I think that just comes with the way this deck was constructed with the Pokestop build. In addition, Raging Bolt can apply the effect of Guzma / boss multiple times as you're attacking the bench directly. And then we also have the multiple ways to attack on turn 1. You got Crispin and Double Dragon Energy, and then Lost City. So, and then ending it with Hex Maniac and Reset Stamp. So, closing thoughts, I just wanted to say overall, I find it cool reflecting on how aggressive decks have evolved in GLC over the past 5 years and an innovation that's happening. Reset Stamp and Hex have always been in the card pools since GLC began. However, it isn't until recently that players have started picking it up and adding it in their decks, especially aggro decks. In addition, it's amazing how strong fighting has become with the release of the set Mega Evolution, setting in the forefront of aggressive decks. Meanwhile, for Dark, the fall off and maybe what it can look to obtain towards the formula of current aggro decks and bringing it back to the top, similar to what we've seen with fighting. If you want to learn more about how you can tech your deck against aggro and how to beat it, please see this other video that I've made earlier. Thanks.